Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. 10th anniversary celebration ongoing. More on that before we're done here today. Really nice day yesterday in our DawgNation World Headquarters studios. We loved that. Let me give you an idea, though, what's coming up today. Before we're done, Davin Bellamy. Do you like that on a Wednesday? I think you probably do. That's really fun. We'll have Mike Griffith here previewing today what's going to happen at University of Georgia. We'll hear from defensive coordinator Glenn Schuman, offensive coordinator Mike Bobo, a host of other Georgia assistants. We'll preview all of that today. We'll share with you on the show what Kirby Smart has said about one of the, I think, most important players for this Georgia defense here this season. But to kick things off today, and we kind of went nerdy deep into the weeds yesterday, we are in a very careful manner going to try to do that again today, around what I think may be the biggest issue facing Mike Bobo, who will face reporter questions here today. Big topic I hope that we hear addressed in greater detail today involving this Georgia offense here in 2025. What is it? We'll start the show by telling you that. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management. They handle bugs and critters.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Most of you do not watch or listen live, but for those of you who do, you know we record this here in the morning. 10 a.m. is our start time in the great state of Georgia. And so today, kind of getting a morning start here, we are previewing something that will happen later on today. A handful of Georgia assistants will have their turn to speak to the media. Do they enjoy this or not? I guess it depends on who the person is and perhaps depends on the season. And it's always interesting when we get a chance to hear from a Georgia assistant coach because, as you know, unlike in the NFL and unlike some other college programs, we don't hear from Georgia assistant coaches very much. This is especially true when it comes to Georgia offensive coordinator Mike Bobo. You already know this. Bobo has been either fairly or not, and your perspective on that may be slightly different. But depending on your perspective, you know, and we all would sort of agree, that Bobo has been a lightning rod around the Georgia program. The Georgia offense a year ago was not as good as it had been in previous years. Mike Bobo is also a well-known figure with Georgia fans, and there's kind of a lingering, long-standing discussion, once again, fair or not, that sort of happened around him. So when Bobo speaks today, and as I'm speaking here on this Wednesday morning, this hasn't happened yet, it is going to get a lot of scrutiny and a lot of attention. And what we know, what we have reason to suspect, is Bobo is totally aware of the attention that all his words will get and the job that he does as Georgia offensive coordinator, the way in which it is also in the spotlight too. Bobo is so aware of this, as you perhaps remember. He's even able to kind of joke about this sometimes. You may remember last year after the SEC championship, prior to the college football playoff, Coach Bobo was asked about his son, Drew, kind of being a part of the fake punt that allowed Georgia to continue its comeback and get the win against Texas in the SEC championship. And in speaking about Drew, Bobo kind of made reference to the fact that he's sort of always the main character in many a conversation involving Georgia fans, kind of using that as a laugh line. Let me give you this back from December as a reminder of just how keenly aware Bobo is of how much he is on the mind sometimes of other Georgia fans. This is from December.
It's funny, the fake punt, I was upset that we're punting again and looking down at my sheet what we're going to do next, and I didn't even realize the coach had said, hey, we're going to fake punt. I really didn't even know Drew was the one that tossed it to him. Hartley hit me and said, hey, we're on offense. It wasn't until after the game that somebody said, Drew, everybody kept saying, oh, your son with that pass. I didn't know what they were talking about. So it was cool to find out that it was a pass that he threw on that fake punt, which was a huge play in the game, and glad he executed and didn't screw it up. And we'd have two Bobos everybody could yell at.
So if you're listening podcast, he's smiling when he says that. Obviously gets a pretty big laugh. Everybody sort of knows this. Offensive coordinator for almost any program. One of the most second-guessed, talked about coaches, even compared to the head coach sometimes. In the case of Mike Bobo, that may be even more intense just because I think one of the reasons on that is he's been a figure in the lives of Georgia fans for such a long time. This has sort of existed almost as much as the internet has existed as the main way in which college football fans kind of consume college football media. The Bobo topic has sort of always been there. So we're going to hear from him today. And boy, I'm telling you right now, there is one topic that I really want to hear discussed in great detail today. Now, some specifics are not going to be revealed to us. We know that. But in terms of just the overall subject matter, there is one thing I hope we hear from Bobo a lot today. And I want to set it up this way. And yesterday we kind of got nerdy for a minute. I guess we're going to kind of do some of that again. You can sort of tell that I'm excited about the start of the college football season because I'm like getting deep into the weeds here in my spare time, in my kind of sort of show prep time, kind of getting ready for stuff. And sometimes your mind sort of wanders and you kind of go on a little bit of a journey. So I'm going to try to recreate this for the show here right now, a little bit of a journey that I went on in my mind, starting with something that has nothing to do with Georgia football, but that kind of got me thinking a lot about Georgia football. So I'm going to show you this on the screen here. I think that sometimes there's a lot more interesting statistical data around the NFL than there is college football. Some of this is true because A, the NFL is just really popular, but B, the NFL only has 32 teams. So the overall data set around the NFL is just a little easier to kind of wrap your mind around because there's just the 32 teams. Where in college football, there's 130 now or something like that. There's a lot, well above 100, of course. So sometimes to understand football better, you can look at some of the statistical stuff in the NFL and just sort of see the way in which that data gets tabulated. I think it gives you a picture of what football is all about. So there's a guy named Warren Sharp. Maybe you've heard of him before. He's a pretty prevalent presence on the internet, talking mostly NFL. And he put out a tweet yesterday that I thought was kind of interesting. He says, Sean Payton, you'll know him as the former Super Bowl winning coach of the New Orleans Saints, now the coach of the Denver Broncos. Warren Sharp writes that Sean Payton's got a quarterback formula. It's the percentage of dropbacks resulting in sacks, fumbles, or interceptions. He says the lower the number is better, of course. Here it is for the NFL quarterbacks last year. Best in the NFL on this a year ago, Josh Allen at 4.6. On the graphic on the screen, I've given you all the guys that were kind of among the best. That's Derek Carr, Bo Nix, Aiden O'Connell, Jordan Love, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Matthew Stafford still on that list there too. When you get, and I don't have the full numbers to show you, but when you get down to the bottom of the list, you got guys that are, having these sort of bad outcomes on dropbacks, like 12, 13, 14, in some cases higher than that percentage of the time. I think this is an interesting way to think about the quarterback position from Sean Payton as relayed by a guy named Warren Sharp. And so since I'm very Georgia-centric, I sort of think about Georgia football, I immediately kind of took that paradigm and sort of used that to sort of view Georgia football for a moment. And so I said, well, if we start thinking about bad outcomes from dropbacks, I wonder what Georgia's overall percentage might look like from the previous season. And I went back, for instance, and looked at the Sugar Bowl from last year. And guess what? It was about as bad as you think. 4 sacks allowed that day. Gunner fumbled a couple times, not throw an interception. But if I did the basic arithmetic right, which is always kind of a tricky thing, I had Georgia getting a bad outcome on a drop back like 17% of the time in that Sugar Bowl loss to Notre Dame, which, given the overall offensive ineptitude of the day, it's kind of an unpleasant number to kind of revisit, but it also sort of makes sense based on what we saw with our own eyes. Just a really inefficient day from Georgia offensively. Had a chance to be better, a couple of balls bouncing a different way, maybe changes some stuff, but nonetheless, the overall results were not good. Using the sort of Warren Sharp, Sean Payton formula, I had Georgia kind of bad outcome on drive back, no interceptions, but either fumble or sack, like 17% of the total dropbacks in that game against Notre Dame. And then I went and looked at the entirety of the season. And what I found was actually a little bit surprising. Now, try to stay with me on this if you can, because this sort of builds to the point we're trying to make today. That once again, kind of basing this on what percentage of your overall dropbacks are like really heinous outcomes. The actual number for Georgia for the full year was only 7%. And that was surprising to me because if you look at total interceptions thrown, believe it or not, Georgia was one of the worst teams in America last year. If you look at total sacks allowed, Georgia was actually Georgia was one of the worst teams in America in that category too. Sacks allowed, interceptions thrown. Like Georgia literally was among the worst teams in America. And so how is it that they only had a bad outcome like that, 7% of dropbacks last season? Well, as I said before, my my arithmetic's not always good, so I had to like double check my numbers. I feel like I'm probably right about that. So how come Georgia was really bad at throwing interceptions, really bad at giving up sacks, but the overall percentage of dropbacks resulting in one of those things wasn't all that bad based on the standard sort of set by Sean Payton, the Broncos coach, relayed by Warren Sharp, the analytics-minded NFL analyst? Do you know what I discovered? And as I told you before, I'm trying to walk you through the sort of, I guess, inner workings of my mind as I'm just sort of sitting around, I don't know, just doing what I do, kind of scrolling college football stuff on the internet. Do you know what I discovered? Do you know why, and many of you are smarter than me, you've already figured this out before I tell you. Do you know why the percentage of dropbacks resulting in like sack or interception for Georgia was relatively low last season, despite the fact that the raw numbers on both those instances was actually pretty high, among the nation's worst in both those really pivotal categories? Y'all, Georgia was 9th in America in passing attempts last season. 9th in America. They threw the ball more than, like, say, Western Kentucky, who, if you follow this stuff, it's one of those teams that sort of seems like they just throw it 100 times a game, every down. They play these 70 to 65 type games. Georgia threw more passing attempts last year than like a Western Kentucky did. Kirby Smart, Georgia, 9th in America in passing attempts. Now, this is where some of you want to kind of pivot this back to Mike Bobo, and you want to do the, run the dang ball, Bobo. And like, I get some of that. I guess I probably do. But there are two reasons, though, why that overall is probably not fair. A, Bobo was the offensive coordinator for Georgia in 2023. They led the nation that year in rushing touchdowns. That was his first season back as Georgia offensive coordinator. The other thing is, in his final season of his original tenure here in 2014, Georgia was one of the 10 best rushing teams in America. They ran the ball that season like 65% of the time. So this idea that Bobo consistently chooses not to run the ball, we got an example in 2023 and 2014, the two most recent seasons of him as Georgia offensive coordinator prior to last year, where that wasn't quite true. So let's make sure we kind of add that evidence into the official record on this overall topic. But nonetheless, Georgia football has no business being 9th in America in passing attempts. They just don't. Now, the other backstory on this is, in the Todd Monken era, Monken comes in 2020. That's a pandemic. You sort of throw that out. 2021, 2022, Georgia wins national championships. But in those 3 years of Monken as the Georgia offensive coordinator, kind of an interesting transformation sort of occurred. There's no doubt that Todd Monken put his fingerprints on this Georgia offense in that they got way better at throwing it. They just did. But in life, there's kind of no free lunch. There's no thing without consequence. I've sort of learned this now that I've got a little age on me, that everything it's more about trade-offs than something is good or bad. It's about trade-offs. And in football, I think we often see trade-offs. That Georgia got better throwing it in the Todd Monken era. But y'all can go back and just crunch the basic numbers. As they got better throwing it, for whatever reason, they weren't quite as successful rushing it. And that's a trend that has seemingly sort of continued a little bit to, like, last year. Georgia at times just sort of looked like an empire in decay. This once mighty behemoth. I mean, in Notre Dame, that game, I told you before, such a high percentage of dropbacks kind of resulting in disaster for Gunnar Stockton his first start. Part of the reason that's true, Georgia averaged fewer than 3 yards a carry, like 2 point whatever yards per carry in that particular game. So all of this is a setup for this. I hope today when Mike Bobo speaks, the majority of the conversation, I'm talking about the lion's share of the questions and Bobo's answers centers around how does this team get better running the football? How do you make that a part of the offense? How do you kind of reinvent a little bit what has been sort of a steady erosion of this rushing attack, going back to even like very good Georgia teams in 2021, 2022, just kind of not quite as dominant with the running game as they once had been. And all of a sudden now that sort of decay shows up even more in 2024. How do you get better with that? And it's not that I think y'all feel the same way that I do. It's not that you want Georgia to be a service academy, and it's not that you want them to never throw it. You just don't want them to have to always try to throw it no matter what because of the struggles of the running game or the fact that you're facing a huge deficit the way that you did against Alabama, Tech, and Ole Miss, where all of a sudden you're kind of forced to throw it in those situations too, because that's the other part of this is sometimes the sort of the dependence in the passing game depends on what the score of the game is. And there was some of that a lot last season too. So as kind of a lead in to what I hope to hear a lot from Mike Bobo, a guy we played some clips from yesterday, Georgia's athletic freak as heralded by Bruce Feldman, Micah Morris, who we do really like. Morris, when he met with the media the other day, he gave his own spin on kind of what Georgia is doing to get better with the running game. There's one part of this clip that I really like. All of it's pretty interesting. And hopefully it's a foreshadowing of what we're going to hear more from Mike Bobo here today. How do you get better running the football? Micah Morris gave his thoughts on that earlier this week.
Me personally, I like hitting people, so yes. But I would say, what have we been working on? Just pretty much just taking it day by day, focusing on technique, the little things, the hand placement, linebacker location, things like that. And then as an offensive line unit, making sure that it's 5 people moving as one so we're all on the same page every time.
He says, I like to hit people. And listen, I get you got to communicate, you got to move together. There's a little bit of a dance that goes on with the offensive lineman. I get all of that, but I also let's face it, like Morris is here to be a little bit of a street fighter in the interior of that Georgia offensive line, kind of hand-to-hand combat, mean sort of bar brawler type guy. That's what he's sort of here to do, and the fact that he embraces that role, I think is a really good thing. So step one to getting more from your running game is probably making sure you got a lot of guys who kind of come to the fight as willing a participant as we believe that Micah Morris is going to be. And we think that Georgia's got at least 4 other guys that want to do that too. So that's step one. But then beyond that, it feels like there's more going on here too. And some of this we may not even hear revealed because I think back at SEC Media Days, Kirby kind of alluded to, they're doing some stuff with the running game they don't quite want to talk about, which is their prerogative. And I think maybe that's even a good thing to sort of keep some of this a secret, just sort of springing on Tennessee in the first big game of the season coming up in a few weeks. But broadly speaking, in sort of a general way, wouldn't you love to hear that be a point of emphasis for Mike Bobo here today? That if Georgia can get back to running the football the way that the best Georgia teams sometimes have, best Georgia players have kind of presented, I think that could speak to really good things here for this team overall in 2025, hoping to hear more about that from Mike Bobo today. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. As we celebrate our 10th anniversary, we are glad you are with us for it. Some of you do watch live 10 a.m. on video. Appreciate that. Most of you watch on demand after the fact. You may already know what Mike Bobo and Glenn Schuman and the rest of the Georgia Citizens going to say. That's really good, too. We're just glad you picked away. Radio, Athens Sports Radio, 960 The Ref. Love being on there every day. And podcasts, Apple, Spotify, all of the various podcast platforms. Just excited about being on all of them. Glad over the course of these 10 years you found something that works for you. We're just really happy to have you as a part of the program. And of course, we wouldn't be able to deliver what we do on a daily basis if not for great sponsors. And a big thanks today to our title sponsor, our friends at Breda Pest Management. Now, I love them. I'm glad for what they do. I'm also thankful for what they do for you as well, because our friends at Breda Pest Management have been serving Georgia fans for a very long time. Matt Breda is a Georgia fan. So many of the folks that work with him, they are Georgia fans too. And they love nothing more than taking good care of Georgia fans when it comes to like bugs and critters and termites and all that sort of thing. And it seems like, especially after it rains like it has lately, boy, bugs just kind of come from out of nowhere, and they are everywhere, all around your house and certainly in your yard. And that creates a nuisance. If it's termites, that's more than just a nuisance. That's also the sort of thing that can really impact the investment you have in your home. So that's super serious. But even like mosquitoes and flies and stuff like that, that is kind of a nuisance-oriented thing. But in all of those areas, our friends at Breda Pest Management want to do great work for you to kind of keep your home bug and critter-free, make sure those termites are not there. They want to do all of that. They do it really well. They're also a big part of our high school football coverage. We're getting ready to get that cranked up next week. Excited about all of that. But the main thing for you to remember right now is that when you make the switch to our friends at Breda Pest Management, trust them, for instance, for your termite protection. They're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that choice, because a company that's had a multi-generational legacy of success in business since 1975, that's the sort of work they can do for you. So find them online. It's bredapest.com. B-R-E-D-A, bredapest.com. One more time, B-R-E-D-A, bredapest.com on that today. All right, so for us, it's great guests coming up. Davin Bellamy here in just a few minutes. So glad to have Davin back on our show, doing great work. That'll be included today as Davin's about to react to the Georgia player we're about to discuss here coming up in just a moment. Also, Mike Griffith to help preview everything else that's going to take place around the University of Georgia today with Schuman and Bobo, other Georgia assistants speaking to reporters today. We'll get a preview of that from Mike Griffith here in just a bit. Let me also take a moment to give a shout out to, I told you before, the kind of big game for Georgia early season is at Tennessee. A couple of tune-ups prior to that. Then you get ready for the big game against Tennessee. We believe that's the day. If Georgia's got new wrinkles in the running game they want to kind of put on display, they may unveil it right there in that spot. It's the sort of game, because of the impact it could have on future games, you sort of pull out all the stops, right? I mean, that's a kitchen sink game. You just sort of throw everything you can to get that one done. Doesn't get much bigger early September on the road against Tennessee. That means DawgNation wants to be at its best too. And for us, that means the DawgNation invasion on the Tennessee River. It's one of the most successful, celebrated events in DawgNation history when we did this on 2023, the gorgeous riverboat sailing on the Tennessee River. And you can say what you want about Knoxville. You can say what you want about the people in Knoxville. Here's what I'm here to tell you. That Tennessee River is pretty. It really is. And when you see that version of this, and honestly, the old sort of Vol Navy and that kind of stuff, kind of a storied tradition. Well, we like kind of taking that story tradition and sort of turning it on its side a bit, kind of painting it red and black. If you're watching on video, that's the shot from the SEC network on TV that day with the riverboat DawgNation style, flags flying, DawgNation logo prominently displayed everywhere. Honestly, it was an awesome experience. We loved it. We're doing it again here in 2025. Tickets are selling fast. Jump in there. Be a part of it while you can. In fact, be among the first to sign up to secure your opportunity to get a DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. That's a really big deal. Also, just to make sure there's room for you on the boat, you got to do this quickly. So go to DawgNation.com/tailgate to sign up for that today. That is DawgNation.com/tailgate to sign up for that today. Tickets selling fast. We want you on there. Make your plans to be a part of it. Georgia's going to Knoxville. DawgNation's going with them. And we're having the biggest party of the season, the DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River. Cannot wait for that. DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that today. All right, now, before it's Mike Griffith, let's get ready to go around the doghouse. Presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And I told you before that there's a defensive player I want to ask Davin Bellamy about a little bit later on today. I want to put him kind of in the spotlight here right now. I think it's really interesting that for whatever reason, I mean, maybe this is true for all of football. Perhaps it's kind of only true for Georgia. Doesn't it seem like Georgia almost always has kind of big personalities on its defensive line? Jordan Davis may be the best example of this, but there are others, right? I mean, Zion Logue, Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson. Georgia just seems to have a good collection of kind of fun personalities, oftentimes among its defensive line. I think that Christen Miller is an example of that for Georgia here in 2025. I think that Miller, already a popular player with Georgia fans, but assuming Miller is as healthy this season as I hope that he can be, I think that his level of fame and popularity within the fan base is really only likely to grow. And I think he kind of stands as one of the most important players for Georgia in the kind of pivot towards even more success this season than it had in 2024. I think Miller's a really key guy in terms of how Georgia might be able to get that done. So in light of that, can we go back last week and listen to something that Kirby Smart said in his own evaluation of Christen Miller? This was Smart's opening press conference, kind of kick off fall camp. Here he is discussing a player that I think is about as important as anybody for Georgia this season. Take a listen to this.
Yeah, we need him to be a playmaker. We need him to be disruptive. We talk about havoc. We talk about quickness, speed, experience. He's our most experienced player. He has taken on this role of knowing the burden lies with him to set a standard for that group. And if we're going to be good up front and we're going to stop the run, it starts with that group. I mean, it's everybody, but it really starts with the defensive line and what kind of mentality that room has. And so far, he has approached that the right way. He did not get to go through spring because of a labral repair, and we're looking for him to have a great fall camp and push the other guys and help lead that room along with Jordan and Xavier and some of those other guys.
So two things here really quick. Kirby Smart talks about stopping the run, and many of you know if you've been following the ongoing narrative that for Georgia, stopping the run defensively is kind of right there alongside running the ball better as the two big issues that Kirby Smart has talked most frequently about. They want to be better at both those things. I would say they weren't quite as bad at stopping the run as they were at running it a year ago, but in terms of the elite category, plenty of room for improvement there. Clearly, as Kirby Smart alludes to, Christen Miller can play a significant role in that. But here's the other thing. Smart describes him as a potential quote-unquote playmaker. And, you know, for football fans, playmaker is a phrase that's sort of taken on a certain kind of meaning. I mentioned Davin Bellamy. I talked to him last week. That if you look at pro football right now, the most valuable asset in the game, certainly on the defensive side, is the interior pass rush, the ability to get to the quarterback from the inside. When I was a kid, it's like Lawrence Taylor, Reggie White, guys like that coming from the outside edge. There is still some of that in pro football, but boy, a lot of this is sort of what like Jalen Carter does now, what Aaron Donald sort of once did, the kind of interior pass rush type stuff. And I'm not here to tell you that Christen Miller is the next Jalen Carter, but boy, wouldn't it be interesting if he kind of lived up to the true playmaker billing and not only was sort of a important cog and a needed area of improvement for Georgia in the run stop, but also that playmaker style defensive lineman that wreaks havoc, that creates the opportunity for turnovers, that just produces the sort of negative plays that really kind of puts an opposing offense in harm's way. I think the outlook is potentially there for Miller. What is the likelihood that he achieves that? We will talk to Davin Bellamy about that later on today. And for now, we'll make that Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, in Georgia, of course, you got to have insurance. Legally, you got to have the auto insurance. Of course, you need home insurance. You should get life insurance probably. There are insurance needs that you have, and you're probably left the question of, well, who do I use to satisfy these needs? Well, my suggestion to you is always going to be on something like that. Trust the friendly folks from Georgia Farm Bureau. I say it all the time. They are always the home team. What that means is they are Georgians just like you, communities just like yours, and they're taking care of business and helping folks out in a time of need. And insurance is sort of one of those things you don't really think about it until you need it, until you're in an accident or until you have some sort of calamity strike your home. Well, at that point in time, when you dial the phone and the other side picks up, you hope that agent, that claims adjuster, that person set up to help you, you hope they're going to be able to kind of understand where you're coming from. Well, in the case of Georgia Farm Bureau, that's always going to be the case. They are always the home team. So please find them. Give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. GFB, of course, stands for Georgia Farm Bureau, gfbinsurance.com. Reach out to them today. Find out why Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team and why we're so happy to have Georgia Farm Bureau as a part of Around the Doghouse. We're also always happy to have Mike Griffith, a part of our show here too. So before Davin Bellamy later on, also big, before we're done today too, big debut for the SEC on a major media platform, kind of a new horizon for the league. We'll get to that here before we're done today as well. But for now, at Georgia, assistant speaking, Mike Bobo in the spotlight. What can we expect? Let's talk to Mike Griffith here right now today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me say hello to Mike Griffith here. A good number of Georgia assistants will speak to reporters today. All of that will be interesting. I do think, though, Mike, I speak for most Georgia fans when I say that Mike Bobo's presence there will be the most significant. I start the show by saying my wish list as a fan, I want to hear the lion's share of that conversation be, how does Georgia run it more frequently? How do they run it with more success? How do they kind of reinvent this aspect of the offense, which has been a little bit of a sort of a state of, as Georgia's thrown it better, they've just run it a little worse. That's just kind of the way that trade-offs sometimes go. How do you reverse that trend here for this season? That is what I hope we hear a lot about from Mike Bobo today. Do you believe that we will?
Yeah, I think so. And, Kirby kind of tipped his hand a little bit when he said, we've got a quarterback that's going to allow us to do some things. I think the quarterback run's going to be a little more involved than it was with Carson Beck. And, as for them dropping off at running back, I mean, you went from a loaded backfield to a not so loaded backfield, and then you had injury issues both in 2023 and 2024. So I think that had a lot to do with it when you think about the injuries they've had back there, and the coordinator having to be creative in terms of how he uses his personnel and going to the strengths. So I think you look at what you have and the hand you're dealt and how best to use that talent, right? And what does your quarterback do? And now that you have a quarterback that brings you a degree of mobility, I'm not sure how much and how dangerous that might be for a guy like Gunner who takes some big hits, but it does appear that they're going to be moving the pocket. It does appear that, from what I've seen, they're going to move these quarterbacks out. That's going to open itself up to some RPO. So I think now that you've added that dimension to the game, I think you're going to see more of a run game, like you said, and more balance, right? Because you want to be able to get 3 to 5 yards on first down and set yourself up down and distance-wise. Last year, we saw a lot of drop passes on early downs, and so you saw a lot of long down and distance situations where the run game effectively was taken out by those drop passes. I think with a more consistent pass game and a quarterback now with some mobility, I think you're going to be looking at a different offense in terms of their ability to move the ball on the ground.
And what I've said is, and I'm half kidding when I say this, but I'm also half serious. Like, I'd love to see Georgia become a tush-push team, right? It's legal in college football. Stockton's overall build. Now, Jalen Hurts is as strong as a bear, but, Stockton's build is at least, measurably somewhat similar. In short yardage rushing situations, I do think that Stockton can be an interesting weapon. I mean, he's not going to be Lamar Jackson, right? He's not going to, go out and, rush for 150 yards during a game and stuff like that. But he is athletic. He is willing to take contact. Sometimes maybe too willing, you might think. But in short yardage rushing situations where you can just get some easy conversions, Mike, some of this stuff comes down to which offense can get the most layups, which offense can kind of just convert the most easy things, and then a few times a game try to do something really hard and hopefully convert about half those. That's just sort of the recipe for football at all levels. Can Georgia make third down a little easier this year? Last year, it was, unfortunately far too heavy of a lift too often. But that's one of the ways I think that getting creative with Stockton in that manner, I think could get really interesting if they were to choose to do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And again, we go back to those drop passes. You didn't have enough of those third and short situations. Too many times it was third and long. And, I do think that the quarterback sneak is somewhat underutilized. I'm not sure, when they finally turned Carson loose to run the ball after the Tennessee game, he was pretty effective. And we also got to look at Rod Robinson and Josh McCray. They got these 240-pound running backs, and if either or both of those guys healthy, that's a pretty good option, right? Again, and go back to the lack of health last year, one scholarship back, and Frazier with the ball security issues. So I think if you have the dynamic running back and short yardage, now that you've got a mobile quarterback, right? Now that we're talking about RPO, is it the tush push? Is it the quarterback sneak? Is it a dive up the middle? Or is the quarterback going off tackle with the option to run it himself, pitch, or maybe throw it to a tight end, dragging across the middle? But to your point, your original point, Stockton's mobility adds another weapon to the offense, and it adds pages to the playbook, or pages that you can utilize. Those plays are already in there, but now you can utilize those plays, and it does make Georgia very dangerous in those short yardage situations, because we talk about quarterback sneak, fullback dive, tailback dive, RPO, potential option, or who knows, jet sweep going the other way with a guy like Dwight Phillips Jr. We've seen Georgia do a lot of different things, and when you've got it clicking, to your point, when you can make the layups, the other team knows you can make the layups. They prepare for the layup. You show them the same formation, you show them the same action, and then you run something different out of it. That's when you've really got an effective red zone offense.
So you mentioned running backs. We didn't get an update from Kirby Smart on injuries on last week, but I've seen photos of Roderick Robinson. The best I can tell, he looks healthy. I'm not a doctor. Josh McCray was not spotted at practice last week, according to reports, but we're also led to believe that's more illness than injury. That's probably, I would think, good news. Maybe Bobo will give us an update on that today. People who are closer to this than me continue to sort of rave about what Bo Walker has a chance to be. In other words, part of like my mission to see Georgia just be better at running the football, part of that I think is aided by the fact, and before you even get to a Cash Jones, I just gave you, assuming health, 4 really pretty good running backs potentially, that if you want to upgrade the overall rushing performance, you perhaps have the horses to do that maybe this year.
Well, and also the offensive line. Drew Bilbo is going to do a really good job there. I'm very optimistic with him at center. That's where it starts, in that center exchange and holding up the interior line. And Micah Morris, that's a guy that I think you want to try to run behind this year. This guy's a monster, the strongest guy on the team, hungry for success. That is a staple of a strong run game when you have a guard like Micah Morris. Got to figure out the other guard spot, but presuming those tackles hold up, and I think they will from a health standpoint, this Georgia offensive line, and I know you had Cole Kubelik on your show, and he's a Joe Moore Award chairman and an expert on the offensive, really does a nice job breaking that down. This is the guy that tells us he believes this could be the best offensive line in the SEC, and that's a mouthful when you consider Alabama's got 4 returning starters, and I think Florida does too. So, a lot of optimism about the offensive line. That really sets the table if you can get that push. We heard Kirby Smart talk about that last week when he said there's something about being able to move people. And Brandon, I don't think Kirby would have brought that up unless he felt like this Georgia offensive line is going to be able to move people this season.
So I want to shift over to Glenn Schuman just for a moment, because he'll also speak today, among other Georgia assistants. What do you think the big question or two around Glenn Schuman will be? I have my ideas. I'm curious what you think the big questions facing Schuman are going to be today.
Well, I think he has the answers to the big questions, but I don't think he's going to tell us. If they've got a plan for how they're going to get, Cole and Williams on the field, when you've already got, Raylan and CJ Allen out there, I don't think they're going to tell us all the different things. We know this. Georgia has, one of the most versatile defenses in the nation. They have one of the deepest playbooks, one of the more, I would say, complicated. They don't like when I use that word, but they can do a lot of different things on defense, the way they coach it and teach it up. And the things that they could do with that front 7 this year, with the type of athletes that they have. This linebacking core, to me, Brandon, this is a mouthful, I'm going to say it, they look as deep in the linebacking core as I've seen in the 8 years I've been around the program. And I know that these guys aren't as proven as some of the stars of the past that we've seen, but I love all the weapons that they've got back there and all the myriad blitzes that they can bring in, pressure packages and, simulated pressures. But it all starts with that interior defensive line. So we're going to want to know how big babies come along. We're going to want to hear about Xavier McLeod. right? We've already heard so much about Elijah Griffin and Christen Miller, but how is the rest of the interior defensive line? Once you start there, once you're able to build that wall and close those gaps unequivocally, everything bounces outside and everything gets cleaned up. To me, that's the most important thing on this defense is that interior defensive line, hearing about the health, hearing about the depth and the development. I think Glenn will talk about those players. But as for what the mad scientist has in store for us with these linebackers and blitzes and alignments and formations, he's going to keep that one under that. I don't think he's going to tip the cap and come out and tell us about all these different blitz packages he's working on.
I will finish with this, though. I think that if a fan could be in the room today and ask Schuman any question he wanted to, I believe the most common question might be, hey, tell me more about Ellis Robinson, because, Robinson – the true former elite recruit. Didn't see a ton of him a year ago. Some of the early buzz from the sort of people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody this last few weeks has been pretty good. Could be a real swing player if he's ready to kind of look the part of his recruiting ranking. Mike, I believe if you gave fans their chance to ask Schuman anything, I think the most common name to come up might be Ellis Robinson.
Oh, I understand it. When you think about his recruiting hype and the 5 stars and his coverage abilities, and I think we got a little bit of a preview in the G-Day game. I saw him make an open field tackle on a tight end, and I said, that's what was missing. The guy wasn't big enough and physical enough for the SEC game, and that's still the question. He's not the thickest guy in the world, but the cover skills, you're right. The ball skills are incredible. But at Georgia, those corners, they're run supporters. You don't just go out there and play corner on an eye and let somebody else make the tackle. You got to be able to come up and run support and stick your head in there. And where's Ellis at physically in his physical development? He looked good in the G-Day game. He's had another summer to grow into that frame, put a little meat on that. The good news is you got Dalen Everett there. He's potential first-round pick. And Daniel Harris is really, since he's picked up on the practice and learning how to go about it, he's developed into an NFL player. So it's a riches. I don't want to say an embarrassment of riches because it's business as usual at Georgia, kind of an oxymoron when you say embarrassment of riches, but they're really deep at the cornerback position, and you better believe they're going to need that third and fourth corner. You're going to go into some matchups against teams that play spread when you're going to do some different things in the secondary. You're going to trot out that dime package, have those 6 DBs. You're going to want to be able to bring in Ellis Robinson in there that can play shutdown and also come up and run support. So he is an important cog because to win a title, this is what it takes. Because at Georgia, like what did Kirby say? They're not practicing to beat one team. They're practicing to beat all the teams. And if you can plug a 5-star guy in there that is now physically developed enough to play up to the skills and the talents, that's to your point and to the fans' point, that is a key cog in the Georgia secondary.
All right, Mike, we'll look forward to reading everything from you there, DawgNation.com. Thanks for your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Talk to you again here very soon.
All right, thanks, Brandon. Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Let me say this about Glenn Schuman speaking today. Obviously, we talked about Mike Bobo a lot at the top. And I'm certainly not wishing him away anytime soon. But I do believe that Glenn Schuman should be the head coach at North Carolina right now. Schuman, I believe, would be a much better coach for North Carolina than whatever this clown show Bill Belichick is doing here in the winter of his career. I just do. And we'll never know why, Schuman didn't quite get that job. I mean, obviously there were a lot of people within that sort of Board of Regents community that were sort of stargazing around the idea of like the big name. Some of that was that. But, in many ways, this could be another audition for Schuman, how he speaks today, how he presents himself, what he showcases about himself. That could be an audition to kind of getting the sort of real head coaching job that you would leave Georgia for, the way that Dan Lanning left to go be head coach at Oregon. I'm not wishing Schuman out the door. I hope he stays at Georgia for a long time. But at the same time, professionally, he is also, I think, about ready to be a head coach. Moments like this will kind of demonstrate his ability to kind of act as the face of a program, something as a head coach that he would do on a regular basis. That said, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I tell you, every single day I'm thinking about all the great fun that goes on when it comes to these Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. And I really think you owe it to yourself to have a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation sometime in 2025, heading into 2026. And for many of you, if you've kind of never been before, I think one of the things you're going to love is the fact that, Royal Caribbean takes one of its newest, one of its best ships, I would say, a ship like Utopia of the Seas, and they make that exclusively for those who are kind of looking for a little shorter sailing. You know, a lot of people like the 7-night sailings, and I think if you can go on a 7-night sailing, I think you probably should. But for a Utopia of the Seas, that's sort of specially built just for those shorter sailings, weekend sailings oftentimes, out of Port Canaveral. And the same kind of entertainment you would get on a 7-night sailing, you get that jam-packed into a 3-night weekend or a 4-night sailing, including the amazing high dive show on Utopia. It's called Aqua 80s 2. And I'm telling you, this is like something you'd see. It's almost like Olympic style diving, kind of combined with music and effects. It's an amazing show. Royal Caribbean puts more into entertainment than any other cruise line. It's truly an amazing thing to see. So Jessica Slater, terrific travel advisor, can tell you all about it. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, let me do a couple of stories here real quick before we get our guy, Davin Bellamy, of course, cruising around the SEC right now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Yesterday was the debut of the brand new documentary on Netflix, kind of looking back on SEC football in 2024. Not every team in the SEC participated. Georgia did not, but many did, and I'm sure many of you are curious to watch this. Believe it or not, I don't always watch as much of this kind of stuff as you think that I might, so I don't know when I will necessarily watch this. I guess I'll probably watch it at some point in time. I'm not against it. I just don't always watch as much of this. Sometimes you might assume that I might, for whatever reason. Here's what I am curious about, though, when it comes to SEC football, this doc, sort of Drive to Survive style, on Netflix. If you have Netflix, if you use Netflix, most of you do, they have that thing on like the sort of home screen, the login screen, where it shows the top 10 series at any given moment. Now, when it comes to Netflix on this, they don't reveal a lot of information about their viewership numbers, things like that. So we don't really know what kind of viewership it takes to make the top 10. That's usually concealed. But I am curious, will this SEC show make the top 10 for Netflix? I am curious how much time it'll spend there, if at all. Sometimes sports things do, sometimes sports things don't. And a lot of this, to me, sort of relates back to what is the future of college football when it comes to streaming. I've told you before, and I think it's a complicated topic, that I'm not quite so sure that college football is quite as good a partner for streaming as the NFL, NBA, things like that have sort of proven to be. In fact, we just saw ESPN strike a deal with the NFL Network. They're essentially buying the network and buying the Red Zone channel. This, we believe, is an attempt to aid their move towards streaming here this year. Such a big expenditure on such a big property like the Red Zone channel, for instance, would lead you to believe they don't quite think college football is enough to sort of carry the weight of a $30 per month price tag they want to put on their consumers for that. I think that's important to keep in mind here. College football is the second most popular sport in America. I believe it's undercovered because of that. And yet that doesn't necessarily always equate to undervalued from a media rights standpoint. Some will tell you, boy, college football could get twice the media rights dollars it's currently getting. All it's got to do is sort of bundle all of its properties together. It could get twice the revenue it's currently getting. Maybe people are right about that. Experts often aren't. I've always been a little bit suspicious of that, as I said before, because given the fact that so many streamers kind of come from a global perspective looking for products with global appeal, it's not obvious to me that college football is necessarily a great fit for that. It seems like ESPN might potentially agree. Let's watch how SEC stuff does on Netflix as at least a little bit of a data point on that. I was going to do a story on Paul Finebaum. I tell you what, let me do this. Let me save that for after. For now, let's make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'll come back to Finebaum here in a moment. And instead, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, let's get ready to transition to the great Davin Bellamy, a terrific Wednesday guest for us here today. Davin, appreciate your time. Glad to have you with us. Hope you are doing well as always.
Yes, sir, Brandon. Man, how's it going?
Good, going great. Looking forward to the start of the season. So excited about all of that. We also talked about Christen Miller a little earlier. I think when healthy, Miller is one of the most interesting players in this team. Good, fun personality. I'm sure you like that, given that's the way you sort of played the game as well. But also, Kirby called him a potential playmaker, saying we need him to be a playmaker. You and I talked a lot last week about the value of interior pass rush. Georgia also needs to be better in kind of the nuts and bolts, sort of basic stuff like stopping the run. With a guy like Christen Miller getting attention, what do you make of his outlook for this upcoming season?
I definitely agree with, Coach Smart. I mean, he's the guy, that just does his job. And at Georgia, especially the D line, is very gap, responsibility. So you stay in your gap, you knock your guy back, and if the play comes to you, you make the play. If not, then someone else will. Well, I think this year he's going to have to take that role of being more of a splash player, making those big time plays, making those, tackle for losses. When you watch the tape on him, he's a gap, stuffer. A lot of people usually don't run, to his gap. He gets a lot of knockback. But when we start, talking about creative negative plays and tackle for losses and sacks, that's where I want to see the, improvement. He's the only guy, on the D line that's coming back that played a lot of snaps last year. And, of course, at Georgia, there's kind of a way you become to being that playmaker. You like, for instance, I was a third down guy. I had a couple packages, had Leonard Floyd, George Jenkins on the field. I did my job. But when it was time for me to be a starter, I knew that I just couldn't do my job anymore. And I think that's going to be his role this year. And I just want to see better pass rushing from him and go from being a run stuffer to just more splash plays, because that's what we're going to need.
As I listen to you talk, one of the things that comes to mind for me is, and it's a different position fit, of course, but think about Mykel Williams last year against Texas, the game in October, where that was probably the healthiest he was all season, at least to my eyes. It seemed like he was. Going up against a respected offensive tackle that day, Williams probably had his best game in a Georgia uniform, maybe certainly the best game he had last season. And you kind of wonder, for guys like Miller and others on this year's team, if that's a template a bit of, hey, let me make sure I'm at my absolute best for the biggest games when I'm facing other draftable competition. That kind of becomes my resume for what I can provide to the NFL of, hey, be at your best for the big moment, help the team get a big win, because it was a lot of those sort of individual player performances on defense a year ago that gave Georgia that win on the road against Texas. They were not a favorite that day. A lot of people thought they were going to lose. It was the performance of the Georgia defense kind of from the beginning of the game that let us all know, no, this game's not going to go quite the way that some people think it's going to go. Guys sort of stepped up individually in that big moment in a way they probably had not all year long. You sort of wonder if we'll see more of that this year, where if you're a Miller and you have a chance of becoming a first-round pick, making sure you're at your best when the scouts are watching most closely because of who's blocking you and who you're playing against, kind of an NFL level of competition. You kind of wonder if we'll see more of that here this year.
When you say that, that's kind of on, the outside looking in of, a guy can turn it on. But the way, Coach Smart, has the team going and, just his rhetoric is, it's any given Saturday, in the SEC. Even though Mykel may have had his best game against, Texas, I'm pretty sure he put his best foot forward during all those, other weeks.
Sure.
So just to say I'm going to turn it on, the lights on, that's not the Georgia way. It just so happened that Texas game, they allowed Mykel to be who he is, and that's an edge guy playing a 5 technique and not inside of the tackle right outside the guard. You kind of saw Jalen Walker, and Mykel on the edges where they could really just, be themselves. So I think, Christen Miller, with him kind of being the guy this year, he's going to have to bring it every game, because we don't know, simply because the guys behind him haven't got as many reps as he's gotten, in the past. So he's going to have to be the guy that's the Jordan, Davis, the Jalen Carter, those guys had to bring it every week because the team fed off of their energy. So that's where I come from, where I say he's kind of transitioning to being, from a role player to now he's the one that everyone is saying, get us going, or it's third down, and majority of the guys are looking for you to make the play, and they're going to play, off of you. So I think it's a bad recipe, when you start saying, okay, we're going to turn it on here and turn it on there, especially with this Georgia team having so much uncertainty with the guys that are playing, around him. He's going to have to be a guy that's really just a staple guy, who brings it every day.
I want to transition to the offensive side for a moment. There's a story at ESPN.com this week about, according to them, they had their ranking of like the most important quarterbacks in college football. Gunnar Stockton came in as not the second best, but the second most important in terms of how he plays, may determine how Georgia plays. And, Dav, I'm a big believer in Gunnar. I like him a lot. I think he has a chance to really provide a lot for Georgia. I thought he did in the postseason a year ago. That said, I don't want him to be the second most important quarterback in college football. If you and I are talking about Gunnar Stockton every time we speak during the season, if the entire conversation's about Gunnar, I don't think that's probably a good thing for Georgia. I want quarterback to be one of the things that Georgia does well. I don't want Gunnar Stockton to be the focal point of all the attention. That's just not what I want Georgia to be. So tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, that not only does Georgia not need Gunnar Stockton to be the second most important quarterback in college football, they'd be better off devising a game plan that doesn't maximize his importance, because that means you're kind of getting the other 10 guys involved. And to me, that's a better success recipe for Georgia overall. Do you agree with that?
I definitely agree. But, first thing first, you're the starting quarterback at the University of Georgia. So there is going to be, pressure on you. I remember when I was there, every quarterback that, was my QB had some pressure. I mean, you had, Mason, who was coming in, after Aaron Murray, and, he had 1 year to start, and, everyone thought he was going to be the guy. And then you had, Jacob Eason, he had hype around him. And then Jake Fromm, he had hype around him. And even when Bryce Ramsey started, for a couple games, everybody was like, we've been waiting for this guy, to finally get his op, and now he finally gets it. So I just think being the starting quarterback at Georgia comes with a certain type of star power, and that's what you sign up for when you decide to take that challenge on. But I do agree with you on, I think with Gunnar Stockton's way of playing, especially early in the season, before we put too much on his plate, I would rather see a better surrounding game plan. Let's get our running game back going. Let's play good defense to get the ball back, to the offense, where he doesn't have a long, field to go, or he's not dropping back and throwing the ball 25, 30 times a game. I definitely think the game plan for him very early on is going to be using his legs, quarterback runs, getting the ball out fast. And then, after season, progresses and we see how he handles the little, things on his plate, he's going to be asked to do more, because just as simply, when you start to get into playing better competition, sometimes you may have to throw the ball 25, 30 times a game. But I definitely agree with you on, if he's the main, focal point, every week, especially early, I don't see that being a good, recipe for Georgia.
Well, I also agree with something that you say, too, that, okay, well, maybe you do have the theory, as I expressed, of you want to try to minimize the impact of a relatively inexperienced quarterback. Okay, well, it's still football, and there's going to come a moment where it may be Stetson Bennett, second half against Ohio State, Carson, last year trying to make the comeback against Alabama, or, against Georgia Tech. There's going to come a moment where it is just time to be a gunslinger, time to go cowboy up and see if you can lead a comeback, that you can't probably get through a full season without asking a quarterback to be a quarterback and do the things that the hero has to do in kind of the late game situation if you're not winning. So I think you bring up a really good point of, for most games, most of the time, you can sort of play it kind of a balanced way. But there is a moment when the quarterback's got to go save you. That's why it's the most important position on the field.
Yeah, no doubt. In my opinion, Coach Smart been doing this way longer than me. But if I was the head coach, week 1, we got Marshall. I'm going to let him, spread it out a little bit. See if he can get that rhythm with a, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, and just build, his confidence way early in the season, just because we're going to need him when we start to get into, the SEC play, and he may have to drop back and throw it, 25, 30 times a game.
All right, let me finish with this, if you don't mind. I talked to Jake Fromm about this a little bit yesterday, your former teammate, that if you look at when Georgia won the national championship in 2021, they came from preseason number 5 to get to the top by the end. In 2022, they came from preseason number 3 to get to the top at the end. This year, they begin the season preseason number 4. Once again, they're going to have to prove to be better than people currently think they are in order to kind of get to the top. Well, back in 2017, you all played for a national championship. And over the course of that year, you kind of proved yourself to be better as a team than I think folks thought at the beginning of the year. And I'm sort of curious from you if there was a moment along the way. Now, on the field, the Notre Dame game, certainly an example of that. You played great in that game. But even kind of like leading up to that, were there moments when you looked around and said, boy, those of us who were kind of seniors that came back for this one more time, we made a good decision to do so, that this team really does have a chance to be far better than media people who are kind of not in our huddle and not in our locker room. We're better than people realize. Did you have that moment kind of leading into what kind of turned out to be such a special season for the Dogs?
Yeah, we definitely did. And it started off with, all the guys saying, we want to come back. I mean, the year before, we lost a lot of games. You got the, Hail Mary, the 4th and 1 against Vanderbilt. So we knew that the talent that we had didn't really represent the record, that we had. So going into that summer, the guys were just focused. Chubb, Raquan, John Atkins. It was just Lorenzo Carter, just the names. We just knew we were going to be better than last year because, first of all, everyone decided to not be selfish and come back and play for each other. And it wasn't about going, to the next level. So first we were just together and we were playing for especially the seniors because we all decided to come back. And then, the Notre Dame game, basically, like you said, you're looking at the schedule, we're starting off, 2-0. And I remember just circling the Notre Dame game. If we can get over this hump, we're going to be rolling. And just to see how much resilience the team had when Jacob Eason went down and Jake Fromm, came in, and we didn't miss a beat. And I remember, man, during our 7-on-7s, no coaches are on the field, and it was ran like the coaches were watching. I was so impressed with how Jake Fromm ran it, being a true freshman, just the sense of urgency with no coaches around, the defense knowing all the calls, all the checks, and this when no coaches are around. So even before week 1, that 2017 team was so focused in the offseason that it had no choice but to lead to basically the season that we had.
Boy, that's a great story, Dab. And you hope the same kind of stuff is sort of happening behind the scenes for Georgia right now. I trust that some of that is, and maybe they can kind of capture some of that same magic that y'all had in a season that I think still has so many fond memories for so many of us. Thank you for telling us about that here today. Certainly appreciate all of that. We'll look forward to speaking to you very soon here as part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Always, and go Dogs.
Good stuff there from Davin Bellamy. You really enjoy all of that. So, Davin's a great resource. And as I said before, talked to Jake about this yesterday, that if Georgia's going to do something special this year, to at least a degree, they're going to have to prove to be better than a lot of people currently think they are right now. Well, Davin telling you kind of a first-person story about how that actually happened for Georgia in 2017. They didn't quite win the national championship, but they played for it. And in year 2 under Kirby Smart, that's a real significant accomplishment. I think that's really cool. I think that's a great story from Davin Bellamy. It's one of the reasons why we love having him on the show. All right, very quickly before we go here, I told you I want to do something on this Ohio State-Texas game and something that Paul Finebaum said about that. Before I do that, can I also backtrack kind of one more time on the topic we were also addressing just before Davin came on, which is what the future of college football looks like on streaming. I mentioned before, okay, SEC's on Netflix now. We'll see what the audience numbers look like on that. We'll never quite get the full picture, But if you're on Netflix, just look. Does the SEC show sort of show up in your top 10 series? Sometimes sports things do. Wrestling typically does. Sometimes the sports docs don't quite make it into that top 10. Netflix doesn't really reveal much about that, but I think it's an interesting snapshot. We just told you that ESPN has purchased the NFL Network. That includes the Red Zone channel. We're led to believe, and I think this makes all the sense in the world to me, that this is a major play in the direction of adding value to what ESPN is going to try to do this fall. We just offer its product for the very first time, what they call over the top, not connected to a cable or like a satellite provider, but actually available a la carte via streaming. They want to make sure they have as much value related to that as they possibly can, which is why they want the Red Zone channel to be able to offer on that. But at the same time, if you notice that, we heard the announcement a few weeks ago that they've actually sold off one of their playoff games. Again, this time it's a semifinal game to air on the Turner stations. So here you have ESPN trying to have as much value as possible to make their streaming product worthy of $30 a month, which is pretty expensive compared to most streaming. Price only likely to go up from there. And yet in the midst of that, they're also giving away some of their college football inventory, prime college football inventory, a college football playoff semifinal game to another network. And I do think it caused us to wonder, well, how valuable will college football be in a streaming-dominated world in the future? Of course, it has a lot of value. I would never tell you that it doesn't. But regular TV, broadcast and cable TV has been very good to college football. Very good to college football. I wonder if the streaming world will be quite as kind. I do wonder that. I am a little bit curious about that. I'll also tell you this. In the ESPN NFL Network deal, the other thing you'll notice is that the NFL is taking a 10% stake in ESPN. And if you want to know, well, how come ESPN sold off one of its college football playoff semifinal games? Y'all, ESPN is a very big business and it generates a lot of revenue. It is not a profitable business. My guess is all the money they pay for all the right stuff they acquire, including now the NFL's Red Zone channel, I bet they are leveraged beyond you-know-what. I really do. I think ESPN probably needs the money. An infusion of cash from the NFL via an equity stake, selling off inventory to Turner as they have the right to do. The contract stipulates that. ESPN may just need the money. And that also has a roundabout impact on the future of college football, too. Worth paying attention to that. By the way, speaking of ESPN, one of its prominent personalities is Paul Finebaum. So Finebaum goes on the McElroy and Kublik radio show each week. He was on there this week. He's kind of ragging on coaches poll voters for what he thought was a little bit of an orchestration, a contrivance of putting Texas at 1 and Ohio State at 2. And listen, I think that Texas is overrated, of course. They, you have sort of a constant fixation in the media, despite the fact, as you know, Georgia beat them twice a year ago. But I don't know that I can join Paul Finebaum in saying that this Texas-Ohio State game is sort of getting some sort of an unfair level of media attention. I mean, as Georgia fans, we don't like Texas. We don't like Ohio State. We don't like them at all. But we can all agree, right? Like, this game is about as good as it gets, right? As a week 1 game goes. And as far as, well, Texas doesn't deserve to be ranked number 1. First of all, Finebaum is the one the other day that said Arch Manning's the best quarterback since Tim Tebow. So if anybody should think that, it's perhaps, him that should be okay with Texas at number 1 or, Ohio State at number 2. They are the reigning national champions after all. We said this the other day, that we are in an interesting year in which nobody is as prohibitive of a favorite in college football as kind of recent candidates to be the preseason number 1 have been. It is a little bit more wide open. That means, you can find fault with Texas, the number 1 team. You could find fault with Ohio State as number 2. You can find fault with Georgia as a top 4 team. And sometimes it's Georgia fans themselves finding fault with their own team. But ultimately, it's a reminder here that the thing you measure Georgia against, or Ohio State, or Texas, is not the standard of what you think of all-time great college football teams being. It's you measure them against the other teams here this year. And from that standpoint, I don't have any reason to believe the coaches poll voters didn't do a pretty good job earlier this week. And my guess is the AP poll voters will put out something that feels at least somewhat similar on that. And while the hype around the Big Ten or Texas may get a little annoying for me, I don't think you can hype this game too much. To have these two teams, no matter what they're ranked, playing to begin the season, I got to tell you, that's about as good as it can get. Also, one more thing before we wrap up here today, can I give you a shout out to our friends at Dr. Pepper there as well. We love Dr. Pepper, love what they're all about, big college football fans. And when it comes to the big games, Dr. Pepper's always a huge part of that. Dr. Pepper in college football, of course, it's a pepper thing. And for many of you right now, that means enjoying the brand new Dr. Pepper Blackberry and the Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar. It is an unbelievably bold, delicious new flavor offering. So many of you enjoy that. Or you're like me, you continue to enjoy the same Dr. Pepper you've been enjoying for your entire life. That's my story on that too. So as you're out shopping at your local Kroger or wherever you're getting your groceries, make sure you stock up on some great tasting Dr. Pepper here today. We love having Dr. Pepper as a part of DawgNation Daily. And as we wrap up here today, of course, we continue to be in the midst of our 10th anniversary celebration. You see the DND 10 logos now on our screen each day. So proud to be able to do that. And really thankful yesterday, our friend Yasmin and so many of the folks in our corporate headquarters here putting together a wonderful cake to celebrate our 10th anniversary. Now, picture doesn't quite do this justice. This was about, 10 feet worth of cake, I guess. And what it is, it's individual cupcakes all kind of linked together with the icing, the frosting on top, the DawgNation logo in frosting right there in the middle of all of this. Like, this was an amazing thing. And if you're watching video, you can also see there's a little bit of a kind of a celebration of DawgNation in the past there on the thing. This was a really fun, awesome party. DawgNation balloons. I'm telling you, I loved it. I was thrilled about it. Thank you to everybody here who's kind of made it a great 10th anniversary celebration for us here thus far. We'll give a golden shoe out to all of those involved. I got to tell you, my family enjoyed these cupcakes. I loved them. It was all outstanding. Really, really appreciate that. So 10th anniversary celebration ongoing for sure. Lousy, stinking Gators. We got a bit of an anniversary here too, because for many of these years, it's been Georgia showing dominance in this rivalry, including the fact that it's been 1,733 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We're back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will talk to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, I'm going to go on Facebook to begin here today. We'll see what they have to say. And while I'm waiting for Facebook to pull up, I'll also read a couple of the others. DT says, big ups to the DawgNation crew, BJ, BA, the entire folk. Yeah, a lot of folks make all this happen for us on a regular basis, and very kind to kind of give us a little bit of a celebration here at the corporate headquarters yesterday. I loved that, and I just loved being a part of all that, so that was really fun. All right, let me get some Facebook comments now. But thank you for saying that, DT. I appreciate that. Greg Baker says, I don't remember when I first started watching DawgNation Daily, maybe 2017 season, but I can't imagine not having it to watch. Greg, that means the world to me. It really does. I truly, truly appreciate that. Thank you very much. Oh, by the way, speaking of Brian Whitaker, Bill Sanders, and ESPN has also, in just the last couple of hours, announced a deal has been struck with the WWE. So the used to be called pay-per-views. They have been, in recent years, called premium live events. They have been on Peacock. Those PLEs will now be on ESPN. So ESPN will be the streaming home for like WrestleMania, the Royal Rumble, all of the big premium live events from the WWE. And this is a very big deal. These events draw huge streaming numbers, has essentially kept Peacock in business until they've recently gotten some other sports stuff going. And so now that'll leave Peacock. It'll go to ESPN. And it's another example of ESPN, I would say, trying to add as much value as it can to its a la carte offering of its, content for the very first time. And here's how this impacts, I think, the average sports fan, in addition to what this means for the future of college football, which I'm not quite as certain of as other people are. The other thing that goes on with this, y'all, if the same platforms got Red Zone Channel, all the college football, some of the NBA, the WWE premium live events, y'all, it ain't going to stay $30 a month for very long. It's just not. And this has always been the thing about cable's collapse that I don't think people have paid enough attention to, is that your Aunt Gertrude, who never watched sports, was paying for you to watch sports because the cost of ESPN, all of its rights fees and things like that, was sort of subsidized by people who didn't know they were paying a portion of their cable bill to ESPN, kind of a per subscriber basis. They didn't know this. They were helping kind of found the feast for all the rest of us. Well, now that world is collapsing, and maybe it's not fair if people who don't like sports to have to pay for sports. Okay. But all that means is that those of us who do like sports, watching sports on TV, I believe, is about to get much more expensive than it currently is. At the current rights holder fee rates, the amount that we pay to watch sports, I think, is about to get much higher. I really do. I really do. All right, let's see what else on Facebook here for a moment. Yeah, but the WWE going to ESPN. Now, this is not Raw or SmackDown. This is the PLEs. And they can, in the last few years, they've also WWE puts out a lot of content. And so they can give something else to Peacock if they want to, and Peacock would be glad to take it. But the big ones, the ones that have the big, well-known, well-established brands, they are now going to ESPN. Those who think of wrestling as fake are left in shambles. And by the way, Philip Jordan Wells says Disney done got fake wrestling now. Look, there was some talk at one point in time that Disney might buy the WWE. I'm talking about not just ESPN, but actual Disney might buy WWE. At one point in time, there had been a little chatter about that. Because in this whole streaming stuff, Disney Plus is not exactly, lighting the world on fire right now. By the way, our buddy Matt Rukavina, how does this sound for a fun day? Athlon magazine in hand, toes in the sand right there in Galveston Island. What an awesome thing that is, Matt. I hope you have a great time. Thank you for tuning in as you enjoy a little bit of vacation. I love to see that. Philip Jordan Wells says that's a long cake. Yeah, it's actually individual cupcakes. But wait, let me tell you this. What you love about the cupcakes connected together via the frosting like that is you have like extra frosting, because it's like cupcake, cupcake, cupcake. They're all touching each other, but you just sort of spread the frosting over the entire thing. So much frosting, which I cannot get enough of. I mean, I just love it. I just love it. So that was great. What else here on Facebook? Josh Hobbs says, I've been watching DawgNation since the very beginning. Couldn't live without it. Everybody I work with is forced to listen. Well, Josh, and to all who are listening there with your work, I appreciate that. I really, really do. That is awesome. Josh, thank you very much. And hopefully we'll have plenty of fun things to talk about here this fall, but I really appreciate that. Brian Whitaker says, people can say what they want, but the WWE makes money, 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 and it's entertaining to millions of fans. You better believe that. I spent a good bit of the 2 nights this weekend watching SummerSlam. Really both nights. I'm not sure I need SummerSlam to be 2 nights. That's a lot of time consumed. But I thought both nights had really strong endings. Garrison Tucker asked a good question. The most dangerous quarterback and wide receiver combo in college football. So let's see if we can give a good answer to this. I mean, I do believe that Jeremiah Smith is the best player in college football. So, you may say Julian Say and Jeremiah Smith just from the standpoint that whoever's throwing to Smith is already really dangerous. I think Smith could win the Heisman Trophy this year. I do. And so the transition, Julian Say into starting quarterback for Ohio State, it's maybe just made easier because of that. So I guess if I'm forced to answer, even though I really don't know how good Julian Sayan's going to be, saying throwing to Smith just because of how good Smith probably is. I do think he's better than Ryan Williams. Probably better than Cam Coleman right now. Not probably is. I think he's probably the best player in football. I do. Johnny Prescott says, as much Dr. Pepper as I drink, you'd think they'd let me do one of those pass competition things. Yeah, I don't know how good I'd be that in the heat of the moment, but I do love all the big Dr. Pepper themed events because I'm telling you right now, this like SEC Media Days is like this, SEC Championships like this, some of the bowl games are like this. Well, they bring out the big coolers full of all the Dr. Pepper, and that's always very, very special for me for sure. Very special. Randy Hall says, how appropriate is the R.S. Andrews cool down given my affinity for frosting? Good play on words there by Randy. Let me check YouTube here. Foster Moss says, Jeremiah Smith could have gone pro last year. Yeah, he really could have. And sometimes I think about this. Okay, well, college football is not better off with players like Jeremiah Smith not in it. But in terms of, at some point, college football is going to have to fight back against the NFL because the NFL, in a very passive-aggressive, sort of subtle way, kind of fights against college football, especially when it comes to like encroaching in on the football postseason, stuff like that. I think one of the ways in which college football, this is sort of a working theory. I reserve the right to change my mind about this, but if college football said, hey, when it comes to a guy like Jeremiah Smith, an athlete like this, we're not properly set up to properly compensate him, that he's worth more money than we're set up to be able to provide. So therefore, we don't think that Smith should have his wage earning potential restricted. We think he should be able to go right to the NFL and let the NFL pay him because we're not set up to quite do that. And the small number of players who have similar value to Jeremiah Smith, maybe they should just be able to go right to the NFL at 17 or 18 years old. Maybe they should be able to do that. The NFL does not want that. The NFL has fought that in court numerous times, most recently in the Maurice Claret situation, going back a good number of years ago now. The NFL has won on that in court. Well, I mean, college football gets, bludgeoned by every radical interpretation of tiny slivers of labor law. Let's let the NFL have to go, defend itself against some of this radical labor law interpretation and see if they hold up against that. And, you don't want less great players in college football. I totally grant that. But you do want a sustainable model for college football. And this idea that college football acts as both the player development and player marketing arm of future NFL stars and gets nothing for it, maybe it's time to ask if that's still the way that things ought to be. Like, I don't think, because, the other day I mentioned something about Stanford or whatever, and be like, oh, don't forget about Olympic sports. I hate to tell you this, and a lot of people feel differently, and you have every right to. I don't give a rip about Olympic sports. I don't care at all, partially because I don't like the fact that college football players who put their life on the line, not just every single Saturday during the game, but every day during practice, why is their labor subsidizing these Olympic athletes, many of which are already rich? Why is college football having to pay for those sports? That doesn't make any sense to me. So you got college football taking the revenue that it earns, keeping these other sports afloat while also for free marketing and developing future NFL stars. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. And these are the things that I think ought to be questioned. Let us see what else. Josh Skelton says Texas fans flooding the show tells you which team is on top, which team wants the other. Yeah. I mean, and this has happened so much over the years where it's like whichever team sort of feels frisky in a given moment, they sort of show up to kind of talk about, all they have going on. It is interesting, though, that eventually most of those folks usually kind of go back into their hole. And I'm glad to have you. If you're a fan of a different team, I'm happy to have you watching. Oftentimes, though, this has a tendency not to last very long, just simply because the success they think their team's going to have typically doesn't last very long. Colby Straughter asked about my thoughts on Nate Frazier. So Frazier, if you'll remember months ago, one of my boldish predictions for the year was that I thought that Frazier would be a 1,000-yard rusher. I am still as high on Nate Frazier as I ever was. I do think now, though, what appears to be a healthy Roderick Robinson, the arrival of Josh McCray, the fact that in some form or fashion, Bo Walker will have some role on this team, Cash Jones involved too, that, the notion that Georgia's going to feature Frazier exclusively, that now seems less likely to be true for me and more of the sort of ensemble cast that Georgia has kind of favored in the past. I think that Frazier, no matter what the overall stat line looks like, I think that Frazier is one of Georgia's best overall players. His freshman season, you go back and look at the numbers that he put up, he put up that, last year, very much in keeping with the Sony Michel freshman season in 2014, a DeAndre Swift freshman season in 2017, not quite Nick Chubb freshman, not quite Todd Gurley freshman, not that level, but Michel, Swift, that's the sort of freshman year that Frazier had, which leads you to believe what kind of career he could have as he progresses. All right, let's see what else. Jeremy Harbin, high on the Georgia defense for this year. I like the idea of that. KC on Cash Jones. No, Cash is coming back. Cash back for Georgia. Anonymous Handle says, I think the SEC show will see an influx of viewers as the season's approaching. It probably drops off at least into the conference championship. Yeah, maybe that's the case. Maybe we will see that. And, of course, what they're showing is footage from last year. That's important to remember. Maybe it will. I hope it does. I certainly don't root against it. There are people who tell you, boy, if college football just bundle all of its, properties together, they could double their media rights. If anything, I would go the opposite direction. Even though I'm very, very pro-college football, really bullish, I think, on what college football's future can be, I don't think that's reflected in the media rights world the way that some people have an eye of. They're going to double their media rights contracts. I just don't see that. If anything, I think there could be a slight bubble with all of these contracts, but in particular with college football, because I just think some of the other sports are a little bit of a better fit for streaming overall. Like, why is ESPN spending huge for WWE? Because the WWE's international audience now is about as big as its domestic audience. That's just sort of one for instance. Jay Buchanan, boy, it's great to see Jay. That's a name we've seen a lot over the years. He says, as a loyal daily watcher since 2017, I want to say thank you for everything you've done for 10 years. I always tell my friends who are dog fans about the show, can't wait for 10 more. Jay, I tell you right now, I wish I had the words to properly convey what that means to me. I just appreciate that so much. It is the privilege of my life to do the show. It really is. I just love nothing more. It's one of the reasons why I sit here and take comments for as long as I do. I just have a good time with it. It's just fun for me. I just really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Jay. I appreciate that. Let's see what else. Trevor Maffetone says, is the Big Ten TV deal versus the SEC ESPN deal still a concern for you as much? So, I'm more than happy to tell you when I'm wrong about something. And one of the things that I was wrong about last year is the SEC's first year on ABC ESPN turned out to be really good for the league. The ratings were gigantic. And, I'm not, an analyst and when it comes to this sort of thing, but I do pay attention to this sort of stuff. They were even higher than I probably thought they would be. So from last year, I think you do have to say that it worked out really well for the SEC to be on ESPN ABC. I was very skeptical of that, but I'm happy to admit when I'm wrong in this particular case. For last year anyway, it looks like that I was, both in terms of TV ratings and the fact that, SEC teams get more of their big games at night. Fox has sort of found that successful broadcast window at noon. That means Big Noon Saturday is not going away. Texas going to Ohio State, that's Big Noon Saturday. Big Noon Saturday is not going away. SEC fans very happy not to have Big Noon anything. They don't want Big Noon. They want They want no noon if they can possibly have it. That's just not what they want. But in the first year, you got to say it worked out pretty well. Admittedly, better than I thought I would. Matt Rugavina says, still missed that CBS intro. Yeah, that's the one thing about being on CBS was I do think that CBS did a good job of making the event feel like a bigger broadcast. ESPN has always struggled to kind of shake off the cable vibe. With Monday Night Football, they finally essentially outsourced the entire thing. They just couldn't stop making their product look cable-y. In NBA, their presentation of the NBA is atrocious. Presentation of the home run derby back during the All-Star weekend for Major League Baseball was horrid. They just have a hard time making events feel big. To do that for Monday Night Football, they basically outsource the broadcast team. They do the broadcast in kind of a completely different manner than other stuff that they do. And I still feel like they don't quite present college football the way that Fox, CBS, over-the-air networks do. But the ratings tell a different story, to their credit. All right, a couple more comments, but then we got to go. But yeah, Matt's right. The CBS intro song is terrific. Tyler Hull says, the only thing better than watching this show daily is going on the DawgNation cruise and meeting BA and the team in person. Well, that is certainly something I wish that everybody in our audience got the experience to do. I really appreciate that, Brian. Incredibly nice. I'm sorry, I meant to say Tyler. Tyler, incredibly nice. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. We love our DawgNation cruise, folks. Love it and appreciate that. All right, a couple more things are going to go. Kenneth Holt says, speaking of nostalgia, going to be really sad for Corso's last game day. Yeah, it really is. And, I think most of us, if you're similar of an age to me, you sort of travel this thing of, all that stuff, the headgear and stuff like that kind of got corny maybe after a while. And you just got a little tired of it, right? Some people did anyway. But what I can tell you is that, I have a son who's really into college football, and you watch game day through these years through his eyes. All of that's like really fresh and new again, is that, the one thing that Lee Corso really understood, and I think that Dick Vitale understood this, John Madden understood this, Madden maybe better than anybody, is that this is a broadcast and it's meant to be entertaining. And Corso did not ever know the most about any of the teams or was not that into getting his pick right. He was trying to put on a good show, which made him seem less serious to some people. But Corso's point would have always been, serious is not what he was trying to be. He was trying to be an entertaining TV personality. And he was a really good one. So I am going to miss him. I really am. And I do think he was great at his job, even if most of my friends would have never said my favorite analyst on TV is Lee Corso. Most of my friends throughout my time kind of, becoming an adult, 20s and 30s, things like that, would have more been whoever was making the best points on air. That was never Lee Corso. But people watched game day for Corso, and that's obviously what the ultimate point of the job was. Trevor Maffetone, yeah, Nick Saban is coming back to game day here this year. Pat McAfee is too, I believe. But I don't, McAfee has not been on wrestling very much at all lately. I mean, McAfee's always one of those guys. You kind of wonder what his sort of long-term future is going to be. And by the way, keep in mind, Dave Portnoy now going to be on Big Noon Saturday. And my guess is he'll probably be a valuable add to that show. He'll probably give that show a little more personality than it's had before, if I had to guess. Somebody asked me what my max bench was. I guess, and I could not come close to doing this now, I guess the most I ever got, I think I probably got 225. It's probably the most. I never got like 300 pounds or anything like that, but I probably got 225. But the problem is I probably weighed more than 225 when I benched 225. So I don't know that I've ever benched my weight. I don't know that I have. All right. We're going to go. Brian Whitaker remembering back the days when WCW used to film its syndicated show at what was then called MGM Studios. They'd just go there and they'd just film a month's worth of shows at one time, which is a different era for all of this, for both Disney and wrestling, to be honest with you. All right, let us see what else. Christy Dixon mentioning kind of some issues with the audio last year on TV with like the band playing and stuff like that. Yeah, that's always a trick. And I do think that the TV broadcasts try to get as much of the, in the business, they call that nat sound, I believe. Cody can correct me if I'm wrong. They try to get as many of those natural sounds as they can because there's a lot more of that with college football, bands, student sections, stuff like that. They try to get as much of that in as they can. And the mix on that is not always going to be, super, super easy. Foster Moss says that's just 4 cookies. That's 4 plates, right? Yeah, I think I've done 4 plates, but that's the most. I think that's the most I've probably ever done. And I could not do that right now. All right. Anything else before we go? Josh Campbell predicting Stockton to have a good year. Hope that's the case. By the way, our buddy Bill Camacho on DawgNation.com is in jury duty here right now. UJ Marine also predicts Saban to USC. Something tells me I don't know that LA would be a great fit for Nick Saban, perhaps. I could see him back in the NFL, though. I could see that. I could see that. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Really good stuff. Appreciate everybody weighing in. By the way, speaking of songs, Matt Rivina mentioned the old Round Ball Rock, which they are bringing back. That's the John Tesh penned NBA on NBC theme. The dun 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 dun. That's about as good as it gets. Really good stuff. Tyler and everybody over at Facebook with the nice comments. I really appreciate that too. Thank you very much. All right, we are going to go. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Going to try to play golf with our buddy Dari here pretty soon from RS Andrews, although schedule's getting tight as the season approaches, so we'll have to see if that works out. Chef Jay Bowen asked about, speaking of schedules getting tight, first high school game. It is a week from today. It'll be at Kell High School. It's my first game anyway. Prince Avenue Christian, debut of John Richt as head coach, taking on Callaway, really one of the really strong programs in our state. They've won like 9 games at least per year for decade, won a state championship before. So 2 different teams that have both won state championships, Callaway and Prince Avenue Christian. That's our first of what will be, for me, 6 games next week in the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic. Final 2 of those coming to Mercedes-Benz Stadium next Saturday. And then we're off and running every Friday night after that. So, boy, it's here, and I'm excited about it. And I appreciate all of you being a part of it, too. RS Andrews, of course, as I said, online, rsandrews.com. Get your air conditioning tuned up. Plumbing emergencies, keep them in mind. After all, the RS stands for Rapid Service. Online at rsandrews.com. You'll have a great day. Back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.